Have you ever noticed how certain moments in life feel almost perfectly timed? A conversation appears exactly when you needed clarity. An opportunity shows up when you had nearly given up. Or you suddenly sense that something is about to happen before it actually does. Most people call these moments coincidences. But what if they are not coincidences at all? What if they are responses? Responses from a field that has been interacting with you your entire life. Because here is something most people never realize. You have been influencing the energy around you since the day you were born. Every thought, every emotion, every breath. None of it happens in isolation. Your inner state is constantly interacting with the environment around you, sending signals into a field that modern physics increasingly suggests is far more responsive than we once believed. But here is the important part. Most people are already influencing this field. They are just doing it unconsciously. Scattered thoughts, conflicting emotions, habitual expectations, all of these create signals that ripple outward into the fabric of reality. And when those signals are inconsistent, the results appear random. Life feels chaotic. Opportunities come and go unpredictably. Circumstances shift in ways that seem outside your control. But the moment awareness enters the process, everything begins to look different. You start to notice that the external world often behaves like a mirror. Not a mirror of what you say you want, but a mirror of what you consistently broadcast. And that realization changes everything, because it reveals something most people spend their entire lives overlooking. You are not separate from the energy you are trying to influence. You are immersed in it. You are an extension of the very field that shapes the events of your life. Which means something profound is happening every moment. The field is not listening to your words. It is responding to your state. And this is where the real mechanism begins. Beneath your conscious thoughts, beneath your daily intentions, there is another layer quietly directing the signal you send into reality. A layer that rarely speaks in words, but constantly broadcasts through emotion, belief, and expectation. This layer is what we call the subconscious. And understanding how this connection works may be one of the most important discoveries you can make about the nature of reality. Because once you see it clearly, something shifts. You stop seeing life as a sequence of random events, and you begin to recognize the subtle interaction happening between your inner world and the field around you. And that interaction has a name. It is called the subconscious connection. And in the next part, we are going to explore exactly why this hidden connection determines far more about your life than most people ever realize. To understand how your signal interacts with the field, we need to look beneath the surface of the conscious mind. Because the conscious mind, powerful as it may seem, is not the primary broadcaster of your reality. It is more like the narrator, the part of you that declares intentions, the part that says, I want abundance. I want a different future. I want my life to change. But the field does not organize itself around declarations. It organizes itself around states. And those states are governed by something deeper, your subconscious. The subconscious mind does not operate through language the way your conscious mind does. It communicates through patterns, through emotion, through expectation, through the quiet assumptions you carry about how life works. This is why two people can repeat the exact same affirmation and experience completely different results. One person says the words while secretly expecting disappointment. The other says the same words while their body, emotions, and beliefs already feel aligned with the outcome. From the outside, the behavior looks identical, but energetically, the signals are completely different, and the field responds to the signal, not the script. Think about it this way. Your conscious mind is like someone standing at the front door of a house, politely asking the universe for something. But your subconscious mind is the system controlling the entire electrical grid inside the building. If the wiring inside the house is broadcasting a completely different instruction, the message sent into the field will follow that deeper signal. This is why surface-level practices often fail. Affirmations spoken without emotional resonance create interference. Visualization practiced while doubt is quietly present beneath the surface produces mixed signals. And when the field receives mixed signals, it does not respond with clarity. It reflects the confusion. Not because reality is punishing you, but because it is responding to the dominant broadcast. The subconscious, in many ways, functions like a transmission tower. It continuously sends signals into the energetic environment around you. Signals shaped by what you believe is possible. Signals shaped by what you expect to happen next. Signals shaped by the emotional patterns that your nervous system has memorized over time. And here is where the deeper insight begins to emerge. Your subconscious is not just influencing your internal experience. It is participating in the interaction between you and the quantum field itself, which means that changing your reality rarely begins with forcing external circumstances to move. It begins with understanding the signal that is already leaving you. Because the moment you become aware of that signal, you begin to realize something extraordinary. You are not trying to learn how to influence energy. You have been influencing it all along. The real question is whether that signal is coherent or contradictory. And this brings us to the next layer of the mechanism. Because once we understand the subconscious connection, we can finally look at how that signal is structured. How thoughts, emotions, and beliefs combine to create either interference or clarity in the field. And that is exactly what we will explore next. Now that we understand the role of the subconscious, a deeper question naturally emerges. If your inner world is constantly broadcasting signals into the field, what exactly is that signal made of? Because it is not just a single thought, and it is not just a single emotion. It is a structure. A layered interaction between three fundamental elements inside you: your thoughts, your emotions, and the deeper alignment held within your subconscious. Together, these elements create the energetic instruction that the field responds to. Think of your thoughts as the initial signal. Every idea, every image you hold in your mind, every scenario you mentally rehearse sends information outward. Thoughts are directional. They indicate where your attention is pointing. But thoughts alone are weak transmitters. They send signals, but they do not give those signals power. That power comes from emotion. Emotion acts like a magnetic amplifier. It adds intensity to the signal your thoughts generate. When a thought carries emotional energy behind it, the transmission becomes far stronger. But there is still one more layer that determines whether the signal reaches the field clearly or becomes distorted: your subconscious alignment. This is where everything either comes together or falls apart. Because if your conscious thoughts say one thing, but your subconscious expectations say another, the signal becomes unstable. Imagine a radio station trying to broadcast music while multiple frequencies interfere with the transmission. Instead of a clear song, what reaches the listener is static. This is what happens when your inner systems are out of sync. Your thoughts may aim toward possibility. Your emotions may fluctuate between hope and fear. Your subconscious may still be running an old program that expects limitation. When that happens, the signal you send into the field becomes fragmented, not strong enough to organize reality in a consistent way. But when these systems align, something remarkable happens. The noise disappears. Your thoughts become focused. Your emotions support the direction of those thoughts, and your subconscious stops contradicting the message being sent. This state is known as coherence, and coherence transforms your signal entirely. Instead of scattered waves moving in different directions, your inner systems begin moving together like synchronized instruments in an orchestra. The result is a signal that is not just louder, but clearer. And clarity is what the field responds to. Because reality does not reorganize itself around confusion. It reorganizes itself around consistent patterns of information. This is why the question is not whether you are influencing energy. You already are. The real question is far more precise. How coherent is the signal you are transmitting? Because once that signal becomes clear enough, something interesting begins to happen. Reality starts responding with greater precision. Events align more easily. Synchronicities become more frequent, and opportunities begin appearing in ways that feel almost perfectly timed. Not because the universe suddenly decided to help you, but because your signal finally became strong enough to organize the field around it. And this leads us to an important realization. If coherence strengthens the signal you transmit, then the real goal is not controlling every thought that appears in your mind. The real goal is creating a dominant signal strong enough to guide the field. And that is exactly what we will explore next. At this point, many people reach an uncomfortable conclusion. If their thoughts and emotions are constantly broadcasting signals into the field, then every negative thought must be dangerous. Every moment of doubt must be sabotaging their reality. And suddenly, they feel responsible for controlling every movement of the mind. But this is where a major misunderstanding appears, because the field does not require perfection. Trying to control every thought that appears in your mind is not only exhausting, it is unnecessary. The human mind naturally produces thousands of thoughts every day. Some of them are clear, some of them are contradictory. Some of them appear and disappear without meaning anything at all. None of this is the real problem. What truly shapes your interaction with the field is not the presence of occasional doubt. It is the dominant signal that emerges over time. Think about a lighthouse standing at the edge of the ocean. Storms pass through, waves crash against the shore, winds change direction. But the lighthouse does not react to every movement of the sea. It simply continues broadcasting the same steady light. That steady signal is what guides ships through the darkness. Your energetic signal works in a similar way. You do not need to eliminate every moment of uncertainty. You do not need to suppress every negative thought. What matters is the baseline frequency you return to again and again. If most of your inner state is aligned with fear, scarcity, or limitation, then that becomes the dominant broadcast. But if your inner systems gradually stabilize around trust, possibility, and clarity, then those states begin to define your signal. In other words, your reality is not shaped by the occasional storm in your mind. It is shaped by the lighthouse that remains standing through the storm. This realization alone can change the way you approach personal transformation. Instead of trying to micromanage every thought, you begin focusing on strengthening the signal that truly represents who you are becoming. And when that signal becomes stable enough, something important happens. Small fluctuations in mood no longer disrupt the transmission. Doubt may still appear, but it no longer dominates. Temporary fear may surface, but it does not define the direction of your life. You remain anchored, and when your signal becomes anchored like this, the field begins responding differently. Because the field does not organize itself around momentary emotions, it organizes itself around consistent patterns of energy. Which leads us to an important question. If coherence strengthens your signal, why do so many people still experience contradiction in their lives? Why do they desire one reality while continuously experiencing another? The answer lies in a subtle but powerful phenomenon. Many people are broadcasting two completely different signals at the same time, and this contradiction is often invisible to them. In the next part, we will explore why this happens, and how these conflicting signals quietly shape the experiences people attract into their lives. Once you understand how your signal interacts with the field, another question naturally appears. If people are constantly broadcasting energy, and if the field responds to that signal, why do so many individuals feel stuck in realities that clearly do not match what they say they want? Why do people desire abundance while experiencing financial struggle? Why do they long for meaningful relationships while repeatedly encountering distance or rejection? Why do they visualize success, yet continue feeling blocked by invisible resistance? The answer is rarely a lack of effort. and it is almost never a lack of desire. The real issue is contradiction. Many people are broadcasting two completely different signals at the same time. On the surface, the conscious mind may be focused on a desired outcome. Someone says they want prosperity, they repeat affirmations about wealth, they imagine a future filled with opportunity, but beneath that conscious intention, another signal is quietly operating, a deeper emotional pattern. A subconscious expectation shaped by past experiences, and that deeper signal may be broadcasting something very different. Fear of loss, fear of failure, a quiet belief that resources are always scarce. So while the conscious mind is declaring abundance, the body is radiating lack, and the field responds to the dominant broadcast, not the verbal message. This is one of the most misunderstood aspects of reality creation. People often believe that repeating the right words will shift their circumstances. But the field does not organize itself around language. It organizes itself around vibration. And vibration is not created by words. It is created by the integrated state of your mind, your emotions, and your nervous system. This is why someone can visualize success every morning and still experience a life that feels unchanged. Because visualization performed with underlying doubt becomes a mixed signal. The mind imagines possibility, but the body expects disappointment. And when the field receives contradictory information, it cannot respond with clarity. Instead, it reflects the internal conflict. Reality begins to mirror the same pattern. A step forward, followed by hesitation. Moments of opportunity, followed by unexpected resistance. Not as punishment, but as reflection. The field is simply responding to the signal that is strongest and most consistent. And this is where a powerful realization begins to emerge. Your external world is not just reacting to what you consciously want. It is responding to the state you repeatedly embody. Once this becomes clear, the focus of transformation changes entirely. Instead of forcing external results, you begin working with the signal itself. You begin noticing where your thoughts, emotions, and expectations are misaligned. You begin recognizing the subtle patterns that create internal interference. And from that awareness, a new possibility opens. Because when those internal systems begin to align, the contradiction dissolves. The signal becomes stable, clear, coherent. And coherence is the moment when the field finally receives a message it can organize around. Which leads us directly into the next layer of this process. Because if contradiction creates interference, then coherence becomes the key to transmitting a signal strong enough for reality to respond. And understanding coherence changes everything. When contradiction disappears, something remarkable begins to emerge inside the human system. Coherence. Coherence is the state where different parts of your inner world begin working together instead of pulling in opposite directions. Your thoughts no longer argue with your emotions no longer fight your beliefs, and your body stops reacting as if the future you desire is impossible. Instead, these systems begin to move in the same direction, and when that happens, the signal you transmit into the field becomes dramatically clearer. To understand this more deeply, consider how the human body operates as an energetic system. Your brain generates electrical activity in the form of brainwaves. Your heart produces a powerful electromagnetic field that extends beyond the body. Your nervous system regulates the signals moving between the brain, the heart, and the rest of the body. Most of the time, these systems are not synchronized. The mind may be racing with thoughts about the future. The body may be tense from stress. The heart may be reacting emotionally to something that happened hours earlier. When these systems operate independently, the result is energetic noise, a mixture of signals that do not form a coherent instruction. But coherence changes this dynamic entirely. When your brain waves slow and stabilize, when your heart rhythm becomes more ordered, and when your nervous system shifts from stress into regulation, your entire system begins broadcasting a unified signal. This is not just a poetic idea. It is something researchers studying heart-brain interaction have observed repeatedly. The heart's electromagnetic field is significantly stronger than the one generated by the brain. And this field does not remain confined to the chest. It extends outward, interacting with the environment around you. When the heart enters a coherent rhythm, the entire body begins to synchronize with it. Thought patterns calm down. Breathing deepens. The nervous system moves into a state where creativity, intuition, and clarity become more accessible. And from an energetic perspective, something important happens. The signal leaving your body becomes organized. Instead of broadcasting scattered information, your system begins transmitting a pattern, a consistent frequency, a stable instruction to the field. And this is where many people misunderstand the nature of coherence. They assume it requires perfection, that they must eliminate every negative thought, that they must remain calm and positive at all times. But coherence is not perfection. It is dominance. It is the creation of a strong enough baseline state that temporary fluctuations do not destabilize the signal. Just like the lighthouse we discussed earlier, storms may pass through, but the signal continues. And when coherence becomes your dominant state, something subtle begins to shift in the way reality responds to you. Opportunities begin appearing with greater precision. Interactions with people feel different. Synchronicities begin stacking in ways that seem almost too precise to be random. Not because the universe suddenly started favoring you, but because your signal finally became clear enough for the field to organize around it. And this leads us to a very practical question. If coherence strengthens your signal so dramatically, how can you begin creating this state intentionally? Because coherence is not something reserved for meditation retreats or rare moments of calm. It is a trainable state. And in the next section, we will explore how simple shifts in awareness, breathing, and attention can begin guiding your system into coherence more consistently. Understanding coherence conceptually is important, but the real transformation begins when you learn how to enter that state intentionally. The good news is that coherence does not require complicated techniques. It begins with something surprisingly simple: awareness. Most people move through their day without noticing the signals their body is constantly broadcasting. The mind jumps from thought to thought. The breath becomes shallow. The nervous system remains in a subtle state of tension, and without realizing it, the body continues transmitting that state into the field. But the moment awareness enters the body, the entire dynamic can begin to change. Start by noticing your breath, not forcing it, simply observing it. When attention moves to the breath, something interesting happens in the nervous system. The body begins shifting away from stress-driven patterns and toward regulation. Breathing naturally slows. The heart rhythm begins to stabilize. The mind becomes less reactive. From this state, the next step becomes possible: setting intention. But intention here is not a desperate demand for the future to change. It is a quiet direction, a clear image of the reality you wish to experience. And more importantly, the emotional state that would naturally accompany that reality. Because the body does not respond strongly to abstract ideas. It responds to felt experience. When you allow yourself to feel the emotional quality of the life you desire, whether that is calm, freedom, creativity, connection, or abundance, you begin teaching your nervous system what that state feels like. And repetition matters. The nervous system learns through familiarity. Each time you return to this state of breath, awareness, and emotional alignment, the body becomes more comfortable with it. Over time, what once felt like a temporary exercise begins to feel natural. And when that happens, something subtle shifts. You stop trying to generate a signal occasionally. You begin living from it more consistently. This is the moment when reality begins responding differently. Because when coherence becomes familiar to your system, your expectations begin to change. Your posture changes. Your decisions begin to reflect a different internal baseline. And that new baseline influences the way the probability field around you unfolds. Which brings us to the next layer of this process. Because coherence alone does not explain how reality organizes itself. To understand that, we need to look at the deeper mechanics behind possibility itself.
The way the quantum field contains multiple potential outcomes, until something collapses those possibilities into a single experience. And that mechanism is known as the observer effect. In the next section, we will explore how expectation, attention, and belief interact with probability itself, and how subtle shifts in your internal state can begin influencing which version of reality becomes the one you experience.
Now that we understand coherence, we can move into one of the most fascinating aspects of this entire discussion, the nature of probability itself. Because the world we experience around us appears solid, stable, and predictable. Objects seem fixed, events seem linear, causes appear to produce clear effects. But when physicists look closely enough at the smallest levels of reality, something very different appears. At the quantum level, particles do not exist in a single defined state. Instead, they exist as probabilities, multiple possible outcomes coexisting at the same time. This state is known as a wave function. Imagine reality as a field of potential events. Different versions of the next moment exist simultaneously as possibilities. Different outcomes, different paths, different experiences waiting to crystallize into form. But something has to determine which possibility becomes the one you actually experience. Something must collapse the wave of probability into a specific event. And according to quantum theory, one of the key factors in this process is the observer. Not a passive observer watching life from the outside, but an active observer whose attention, expectation, and perception influence how reality stabilizes. This is often called the observer effect, where the act of observation interacts with the system being observed. Now, it is important not to oversimplify this concept. The observer effect in physics is complex and still debated in many ways. But what it clearly suggests is that reality is not completely independent of observation. There is interaction, participation, a relationship between awareness and the physical world. And this idea becomes especially interesting when we connect it to the signals generated by the human mind and body. Because if reality exists as a range of probabilities, then your expectations begin to matter in a very practical way. Expectation acts like a filter through which potential outcomes become more or less likely. Think of it like walking down a hallway filled with doors. Each door represents a different possible version of the next moment, a different opportunity, a different outcome, a different direction your life could take. You will not open every door. You will tend to open the one you expect to open, and that expectation is rarely formed consciously. It emerges from the deeper patterns stored in the subconscious mind, from the emotional states your body has become familiar with, from the beliefs that quietly shape how you interpret the world. This is why two people can face the exact same situation and experience completely different outcomes. One person expects opportunity, the other expects limitation. One sees a door, the other sees a wall. And over time, those expectations begin shaping the probability patterns that unfold in their lives. This does not mean that reality is a simple projection of thought, but it does suggest something important. Your internal state influences the range of possibilities you are able to perceive and interact with, which means small internal shifts can create surprisingly large changes in the direction your life takes. A new belief, a new expectation, a new emotional baseline. These subtle adjustments begin nudging the probability field in different directions, and when those shifts become consistent enough, something remarkable begins to happen. Reality reorganizes, new opportunities appear, unexpected connections form. Events begin aligning in ways that feel almost too precise to be accidental, not because the universe suddenly changed its rules, but because the signal you are transmitting has begun interacting with the field differently. And this brings us to an important realization. Changing your life rarely requires controlling every external variable. Often, it begins with shifting the internal expectations that guide how you interact with the field of possibility. And that leads us to the next layer of this process. Because once probability begins shifting, something else becomes essential: letting go of the need to control every detail. In the next section, we will explore a paradox that many people struggle with. Why trying too hard to force reality often creates resistance, and why surrender, surprisingly, can give you more influence over the field than control ever could. Once you understand that reality contains multiple potential outcomes, another realization begins to emerge. Change does not always happen through force. Often it happens through probability shifts. Small adjustments in how you think, feel, and expect the world to respond begin altering the direction in which reality unfolds. Not all at once, but gradually. Almost like a compass, slowly changing direction. Imagine walking down a long corridor lined with doors. Each door represents a possible version of the next moment. A conversation that could happen. An opportunity that could appear. A decision that could lead your life toward a completely different path. At any given moment, many of those doors exist simultaneously as possibilities. But you do not open all of them. You open the one you expect to open. Expectation acts like an internal navigation system. And that expectation is not built only from logic. It is built from the emotional baseline your nervous system has learned over time. If your system is accustomed to anticipating rejection, your attention will naturally scan the environment for signs of rejection. If your system is familiar with expecting opportunity, your perception begins scanning for possibility instead. In both cases, the environment may contain similar elements. But the internal state determines which patterns become visible, which opportunities feel reachable, which decisions seem realistic. This is why internal change can sometimes produce surprisingly rapid shifts in external circumstances. When the baseline expectation changes, the way you interact with the probability field changes as well. Your posture shifts. Your tone of voice changes. Your attention begins focusing on different signals. You respond differently to situations that once triggered fear or hesitation. And through these small adjustments, the probability landscape around you begins reorganizing. Doors that once seemed invisible become noticeable. Paths that once felt closed begin opening. New connections form. New timing appears. From the outside, these events may look like sudden breakthroughs, unexpected luck, or perfectly timed coincidences. But from the inside, something deeper is happening. Your internal state has shifted the probability pattern you interact with, and once that shift becomes stable, the external world begins reorganizing to reflect it. However, this process introduces another important paradox. Many people begin this journey by trying to control reality too tightly. They attempt to force outcomes, to demand immediate proof, to monitor every detail of the process. But this kind of effort often creates resistance rather than alignment. Because the field responds to clarity and stability, not pressure. Which brings us to one of the most counterintuitive insights in this entire discussion. Sometimes the most powerful move you can make is not pushing harder, but releasing the need to control every step of the process. And that brings us to the next layer of this exploration, the paradox of surrender. At this stage, many people reach an unexpected tension. On one hand, they begin to understand that their internal state influences the field around them. They realize their thoughts, emotions, and expectations shape the signal they broadcast. But on the other hand, this realization can create a new form of pressure. They begin trying to control everything. Every thought, every emotion, every possible outcome. And without realizing it, they replace unconscious living with a different kind of struggle. The struggle to force reality to behave the way they want. But this is where a paradox appears. Because the quantum field does not respond well to force. It responds to alignment. And alignment often requires something that feels uncomfortable to a mind trained to control everything: surrender. Now, surrender is one of the most misunderstood concepts in this entire conversation. Many people hear the word and imagine passivity, giving up, stopping effort, accepting circumstances as they are. But true surrender has nothing to do with resignation. It is not about abandoning your intentions. It is about releasing the need to micromanage how those intentions unfold. Think of it like planting a seed. You prepare the soil, you plant it carefully, you give it water and sunlight. But you do not dig the seed up every day to check whether it is growing. You allow the process to unfold. And the moment you stop interfering with anxious control, something remarkable happens. The natural intelligence of the system begins organizing the growth on its own. Your interaction with the field works in a similar way. You set a clear intention. You cultivate a coherent state. You align your expectations with the reality you want to experience. And then you release the need to force the details. This release removes one of the biggest sources of interference in the signal you send, because anxious control often carries hidden doubt. It says, "I trust the process." While constantly checking if the process is working, it says, "I believe things will change," while secretly fearing that nothing will happen. And the field responds to that tension. But when surrender becomes genuine, the signal stabilizes. You stop grasping for proof. You stop panicking when the timeline does not unfold exactly as expected. You stop trying to force reality into shape. Instead, you hold the state. You remain aligned with the signal. And from that state, something subtle begins to change. You stop chasing the life you want. You begin embodying it. You stop asking reality for permission. You begin moving as someone who is already aligned with that possibility. And this is where the interaction with the field becomes far more powerful. Because the moment you release the need to control every detail, the subconscious connection opens wider. Your system relaxes. Your signal stabilizes. And the field begins reorganizing itself around that coherent state, not as a reward, but as a reflection. And this realization leads to the final step in this entire process. Because once you understand coherence, once you understand probability, and once you understand surrender, the real transformation begins when these ideas stop being concepts and start becoming a way of being. In the final section, we will bring everything together. Not as a technique you practice occasionally, but as an identity you live from every day. At this point, something important becomes clear. You are not here to learn how to control energy. You are here to become it. Because energy responds to energy. The field responds to signal. And the events we call coincidences, synchronicities, or sudden breakthroughs often appear when someone stops chasing outcomes and starts embodying the state that matches them. When you walk through life in coherence, mind aligned, heart steady, nervous system regulated, the signal you transmit becomes unmistakable. And the field responds, not instantly in every case, not in dramatic ways every single day, but steadily. Circumstances begin reorganizing. The right conversations appear. Unexpected opportunities surface. Connections form at the exact moment they are needed. Not because reality suddenly decided to favor you, but because the signal you are transmitting has become clear enough for the system to organize around it. Living as the signal does not mean you never experience doubt. It does not mean every moment feels perfectly aligned. Human experience still includes uncertainty, frustration, and emotional movement. But those states no longer dominate your baseline. They pass through without defining who you are. And this is where identity becomes the real engine of change. When your identity shifts, your signal shifts. When your signal shifts, your interaction with the field shifts. And when that interaction stabilizes, the reality around you begins responding differently. Think again about the lighthouse we mentioned earlier. It does not chase ships. It does not force the ocean to calm down. It simply stands steady, broadcasting its signal through the storm. And because that signal remains constant, Navigation becomes possible. Your role in this process is similar, not to control every wave of life, but to remain anchored in the signal that represents who you are becoming. When you live from that place, something subtle changes in how others experience you. People feel the steadiness of your presence. Opportunities seem to appear at the right moment. Life begins to feel less like a struggle against circumstances, and more like a conversation with them. And eventually a realization emerges. You were never separate from the field you were trying to influence. You were always part of it. The signal was always there. You were simply unaware of it. So the real question is no longer whether reality can change. The question becomes much simpler. Are you willing to consistently tune your state to the version of yourself that already exists as a possibility in the field? Because that version is not somewhere far in the future. It is not on the other side of endless effort or constant struggle. It already exists as a potential, waiting for you to align with it. And when that alignment becomes natural, something extraordinary begins to happen. You stop trying to create quantum events, and you begin living as one.